I'm Thomas Mills with Politics NC, and we have another installment of Restless Natives NC with our panelist, Anderson Clayton, chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party, and Travis Fain, analyst extraordinaire and former journalist. Folks, since we last met, the fire hose has not stopped. It just keeps going. Whether it's ICE agents in Minnesota or the president trying to take Greenland, the news is just almost too fast to go. But, we'll talk a lot about North Carolina politics today, but I do want to start. We are at the 1-year anniversary of Donald Trump's second term, and we have seen a ton of polls come out, which basically makes me feel pretty good because people actually agree with what I think for a change. And I feel like for a long time, I was on the wrong side I was on the other side of most of the American people. But these polls have been brutal. I mean, Donald Trump's underwater by double digits in most of them. And there were a few interesting questions that tease out who the electorate really is. And one of the best questions I saw was a question in a CNN poll. And it said, are you proud of Donald Trump as president? 35% of the people said they're proud of Donald Trump. That's MAGA. And it's a little bit scary, but essentially a third of the country are people who would probably support this guy if we had, video of him molesting children. They would come up with some justification for why it was okay. I think there's another 7% of Republicans who don't really like him, who don't believe he's an honorable man, but they're going to support him because they believe his policies are okay. Charles Murray, who's a academic who wrote a book called The Bell Curve, basically said that. He said, I've come to believe he's not a very good guy, but his policies are good for America.
Which way, if I could weigh in, to interrupt there, what they're really saying when they say whose policies are good for America is he fools enough of the idiots to pass the policies that we, the elites in this party, want. That's
Right.
the translation on that.
Right. And one of the things that I've done is I have started reading mainly conservative. I read almost no liberal publications anymore. I read commentary. I read a whole lot of National Review. I'm trying to understand where these folks are. And it's really a handful of policies. Number one is tax cuts. They think that tax cuts are the be all end all. The other thing is bombing Iran. They love bombing Iran. They're very much pro what happened in Venezuela. They're a little bit disappointed in him that he didn't go further, but they believe that we ought to be using American muscle in the Western Hemisphere. There are a couple of more. They like closing the borders, which I think is really actually has broad support. The closing the borders. What they like deporting people. But again, they have problems with the way he's doing it. But other than that, it starts to get beyond that. They don't have a whole lot of things to like about him, but they're going to vote for him anyhow because they'll take that over everything else that he's doing that's embarrassing the country. And that's really disturbing to me. But anyhow.
And it has long-term consequences. One of the things we depend on a president to do is to be a beacon in some ways that impacts not just this time in humanity, but decades and even generations to come. There's a great quote from a movie called HUD, which is an old Paul Newman movie.
Yeah.
And the father figure in it says, little by little, the look of the country changes based on the men we admire. And, it's an older movie, so we'd say men and women now. But that is so true. The people that we admire, that we see being successful, that we aspire to, if you mess that up too much, it really has long-lasting consequences that you cannot predict.
Right. And it's been really disturbing to me to watch the fact that he's been able to sustain support as long as he has. And I think it's really the presidency in general has been very illuminating. Again, it gets back to that idea that to me, I look at the country now is there's 35% who they're lost. They'll do whatever. They really don't have, in my opinion, they have
Well,
they're in moral collapse.
let me set Anderson up here with a question here then.
Okay.
Because one of the things that I really hold as a core value is that none of us are going anywhere. We got to work together. And so how do you draw the line between accountability for all the decisions that we all make, but also leaving the door open so that these people are my brothers and my sisters and my fellow Americans going forward? And maybe, because you can't paint someone into a corner and tell them you should never vote for a Democrat or for a good candidate again because you made these mistakes. So Anderson, how you've got to straddle that line, because you've got to grow the Democratic Party without growing it with a bunch of people who are only going to vote for jackass policies. So how do you balance that?
I listened to Thomas and I'm like, well, I've been somebody who said the Democratic Party can't ignore or leave out rural voters for the last 6 years that I have done organizing or been involved in some sort of the political fight. And for me, a lot of those people are that 35% that you're talking about. And so I think that for me, it's like we have to chase them and we have to still be willing to talk to folks and to meet people where they are. And I also think about it from the perspective of my dad, because I think 26 or 2026 to me is no different than where we were in 2016 and going into people voting for Donald Trump for the first time and sort of that 2017 era and going into 2018 where we were. But 2016, my dad votes for Donald Trump. And I think that the world has fallen down and that it is going to collapse. It's going to end. We are never going to see. And this is not to say that what we're not experiencing right now is not 10 times worse, because I think he figured out from a first term that you have to move quickly because Congress exists. And I think he has done so completely. But it's just thinking about that same context of my dad realized, and I told this story the other day because I think the background's important, right? My dad was a person who worked in Hickory, North Carolina. He grew up on a tobacco farm here in the state. Somebody who knew hard work from the day that he was 6 years old to the day that he went off to college, and even then came back on the weekends to work on the farm to be able to help out his parents. And then went to Hickory, North Carolina and worked in manufacturing for the rest of his life. He got an engineering degree at NC State. He's not somebody who is a typical, I think, what people would define as a Trump supporter, or what Democrats honestly have labeled as Trump supporters in the past. But he was, because Trump made a promise to him, and he promised to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States again. And my dad had held a grudge after he had lost a job in 2007. And I tell that story a lot to people, especially when people look at me and they say, how do we win back rural America or rural North Carolina? Because it is people like my dad who I think have still felt a resentment towards a political party that they feel took something away from them, made them a promise that never came through for it, right? And my dad voted against that same president in 2020 because he had not delivered on that promise that he made in 2016 throughout that 4-year term. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing right now too, is that people are waking up, or are going to wake up, maybe not that whole 35%, but Donald Trump made a promise to bring prices down. He made a promise to make lives better for the American people. And what you can tell from polling, but also just from the vibes of the country right now, is not that people feel safer, that they feel more secure, that they feel more stable. They honestly feel the exact opposite of those things since we've had this presidency. And I think that those are the things that you take to voters like that with an open mind, that they're going to come back at you with some crazy motherfucking shit that you are then going to have to say, okay, how can I talk to you about the issues that we agree on, though, the things that we need to come back to? And having those conversations, I think, can be some of the toughest ones that we do. So we need really well-trained people out there talking to folks this year about it. And if you're interested in being one of those folks, we've got trainings on the NCDP website. We've got Canvas launches that go out weekly, and we'd love to make sure that you're a part of that, because I still think that everybody in North Carolina is somebody we're talking to about this election cycle. That's my pitch, but also it's my real truth of if we had given up on that 35%, I would have given up on my dad a long time ago. And I just don't think that's worth doing,
I don't think your dad's at 35%. The 35% are the people that are 3-time Trump voters. That's who the 35% is. And that's where you and I may part ways.
But how do you know
I
that
would
all
say
of
we
that
disagree
35
with
are 3-time Trump voters? Is that data that
that.
people have voted 3 times for him, or is that they fluctuated
I think
at all?
if you have seen what's happened from 2016 to now, and you say you're proud to have Donald Trump as a president, you probably voted for him all 3 times. And I think you're kind of a lost cause. And it's part of, to me, that's how I see the democracy.
Or
There's
you just
always
voted
going to
for him
be
for
the
the
lost
first
cause.
time.
What's that?
or you just voted for him for the first time. Like, I don't know that that's and not to say
your dad,
not
go
to say
ahead.
there's not truthers, right? Not to say that there's
Right.
not, but just to say that, like, do I think that that person is somebody never worth speaking to again for No, right? Still
Well,
not.
right. So here's my point, though: is your dad, would your dad say today that he's proud to have Donald Trump as president of the United States?
No, but my dad's also someone who has now had a Democratic Party chair as a daughter for the last 3 years of his life, and ran as a Democrat for Person County Commission at the he's really come a long way. I thought about that the other day on a gator ride with him. I was like, dang, we have come a long way since 2016. Right. And so I think if you've got a little persistent person in your life who wants to who cares about you, who believes that you know better and that your true moral compass is better than what you're allowing it to be right now. And I hope that everybody's as lucky in their life to have somebody like that, to be honest with you, and multiple people of them, hopefully.
Right.
And you should go be that person in somebody's life. You should care enough about people who are voting an opposite way than you to still have a tough conversation with them, I think. And
I think
I'd be the one of this to make that point, though, to be honest with y'all. I don't know.
Thomas, the assumption you're making here, I don't think is an unreasonable one. But I think we can also kind of set aside the actual percentage number, because it's, whatever number it is matters, but we're not going to be able to get to the bottom of it exactly. I think the 35% that you've put in of people who are proud, that's a solid proxy. But what Anderson's talking about, I mean, that's not only politics, that's a very core human morality. I mean, what does Christianity say? It says, if you only love your friends and not your enemies, and I'm not calling anybody an enemy, and I'm not fully equating the political system to how we deal with each other in humanity, but there are corollaries, right? Like if you only talk to the people who are your friends or who you think you can persuade, even the tax collectors do that, right? I mean, that's what the Bible says. Even the tax collectors. I don't know why tax collectors are so bad in the Gospels, but they're not
bad
popular.
If you do a county commission meeting too.
So, and there's just no other way out, right? There's no way forward but forward, trying to bring along as many people as you can. And so don't let it be your fault that they don't get brought along. If it's their fault they don't get brought along, you did what you could. But how exhausting that must be, because I mean, it's very easy for me to sit here and talk to y'all about this for 45 minutes on a podcast. I'm not Anderson. I don't have to go out and do this after that. You know what I mean? Like it's just...
We should do a podcast on the doors.
I'm sure. What?
We should do a podcast on the doors where all three of us are out there knocking doors one day, asking people what they think.
Having our own conversations.
I mean, I don't hate that idea. So sometimes I think literally talking to people one-on-one is what it takes to get anything done in this world. Which I hope my clients who rely on me for mass communication advice do not listen to this podcast, I guess.
Well, I don't disagree with what you're saying about having broader conversations. I'm looking at it more from what I consider electoral politics, and what I've learned is that there are people you can talk to and persuade. There are people you can talk to and never persuade, and there are people who are always with you. And the people who are always with you, you just try to get as many of those people into the polls as possible. And the people that are that you can't persuade at all, just ignore them. And the people that you can persuade, those are the ones you want to have those conversations with one-on-one. See, I think that I think that there's basically about 42% of the population that are just going to be hardcore Republican. There's probably a corresponding 40% that are going to be hardcore Democrat. You're going to have somewhere between around 18, somewhere north of 15, between 15 and 20% who can you can go either way. And those are the people who you need to get them to understand your view and accept your view. I also think that those people are inherently self-interested, and they really don't care what's happening in Greenland. They don't really care what's happening in Venezuela. They care about what's happening at their pocketbooks. And they're not dumb people, but they're people who they just don't pay attention to politics. They don't live on Twitter. Twitter's not real life. And I would argue that those people they're spread across the country. They're not, a majority of that 35% to 42% may be in rural areas, particularly in North Carolina, may be in rural counties. So it's a little bit higher, but I still think that there's a fair number of those people in those rural counties that are still persuadable that we need to be talking to, which gets back to a lot of other things I've been thinking about organizing that I won't get into too much. But
I was about to say, Thomas, you sound like the perfect political consultant right there with like about half the they're going to come out, about the other half, they're going to do this. And there's this little thing. And I'm like, yes. Travis and I are over here being like, we're waxing about humanists. We're like,
right.
Well, there's money involved. You're being realistic because it costs money.
And that's why I'm like, you're doing it right. You're doing it right. Travis and I are also sitting here being like, but what if we just cared about each other?
Yeah.
Right. Well, here's what I care about.
What if I just hug every voter?
I want
what if we knocked every door? Like, I think we could make a difference.
Well, I want Democrats to do a better job. I want Democrats to do a better job of relating to people. And I've had this long thought in my head that it's been going on for a number of weeks. And what I really want to do, and I've been thinking about writing a book, I want more Democrats to go to church. I want them to get back to church, and I'm a guy who doesn't go to church, and I haven't gone to church for a long time, but I grew up in a church. And, and when I think a lot about growing up in Wadesboro, North Carolina, all the time. And, Wadesboro Wilson County just flipped. It basically is voting Republican. It's still probably on the bubble. It was a county that was half African-American, half white. I grew up in the middle of the civil rights movement, but I grew up in a church, and, you kind of knew everybody. You knew black people, you knew white people, so only had 20,000 people. Largest town had 4,000 people was Wadesboro, where I grew up. You knew everybody. You knew black people, white people, poor people, rich people, and you didn't always agree with them on everything, and yet you had conversations. And I've thought long and hard about it, and it's like, I think what's broken down most in this country are civic institutions. When I was growing up, most adults, and it was mainly men, members of clubs, the Civitan Club, the Optimist Club, the Rotary Club, but they did civic duties, and they all went to these clubs, and they did things like,
they wouldn't let women in. Yeah.
Well, they started to, as they started, they did later in life. I'm old though. See,
I'm also like, a lot of the churches and the places that I grew up in, Thomas, were segregated and still are to this day.
That's right. They're still segregated. But I believe that the place to start rebuilding those institutions is the church. And And if you can rebuild the church, and Democrats have basically, to a large degree, abandoned a lot of Democrats have abandoned religion, and I think that's a terrible thing.
Democrats have abandoned religion, Thomas.
I think if you go look at polls and ask how many Democrats go to church on a monthly basis, it would be way less than half.
But how many Republicans would? I think it'd be way less than half too. A lot of them watch sermons on their phone.
Republicans overwhelmingly go to church. That's the problem.
Like a physical church, though. Like, I actually think if you...
Yes.
I'd love to see that statistic. But I also think...
I'll go find it. It's out there. Pew does a very good job of tracking that stuff. Because, but I think one thing is that Democrats have allowed themselves to get demonized around a bunch of stuff that they my beef is that Democrats allow themselves to get demonized by a lot of stuff that came out of the far left that the Democrats never pushed. Defund, we got identified as defund the police when you couldn't find an elected Democrat who wanted to defund the police. And yet half the country thought that we wanted to defund the police.
That doesn't mean, though, that we are or that we don't go to church anymore, Thomas. That means that there's a Republican right-wing media machine that is out there propelling that information that Democrats have not built the equivalent of yet, which I would agree with. Yes.
Hey, I'm a big believer in building the machine, but I think you're going to counter that machine better if you're having those, back to your point, having those conversations face to face, and you're more likely to have those conversations if you're all sitting in church together or in Sunday school together after church. Then
a lot of my Democrats go to church. Thinking about a Dante Pittman sitting up in there right now, who's usually in church on Sunday, if not up there on a pulpit with somebody. Thinking about Caleb Tedros in Charlotte right now in Mecklenburg County. Thinking about and Alma Adams, right? A Valerie Fouché, right? Thinking about my Robert Reeves, I know is in church every Sunday.
I know Robert's and I know that's again again, that's my point. That is my point. Most of these elected Democrats are going to church or going to synagogue, going somewhere, but most of the people who aren't elected officials are not. And so when the defund the police comes down, and is there any place where on a regular basis Democrats and left-leaning people are in congregations of more than 50 people on a regular basis? Not once a year. Republicans are in church overwhelming, and I will send you what Pew says about it. They're in church together. So when the defund the police comes down the pipe, they're getting their information from each other, and there's nobody in the churches to contradict it.
Thomas, you gotta delete that part of me laughing so badly while you're talking about defund the police, because I truly, the only thing that came to my mind was saying, so if you're a Democrat,
What?
if you're a Democrat listening to this, make sure you go to your nearest church on Sunday.
I just think that if you're going to rebuild institutions, the place to start rebuilding institutions is in the church. That's my thought, is that we have watched the Republican Party burn down our institutions, and they still have theirs. They burnt down most public institutions. Some of them died on the vine. You know, the Optimist clubs or Civitan clubs, those things have basically died on the vine. So you don't have civic organizations that dominate, that are a major part of public life anymore. But Republicans still have the church, and Democrats don't. And the other thing is if you start going to church, you're going to have a better chance of influencing your neighbors if you're dealing with them on a day-to-day basis in a relatively neutral place. So from a political standpoint, I think it would be better. And I think a majority of people, in this country say they have some sort of religious affiliation or a belief in God. And yet, again, the only ones that are actually going to church are the Republicans. Democrats they're just not. I mean, rank and file Democrats don't go to church for the most part, particularly ones living in urban areas. You know, I mean, I grew up my entire life, watched churches. I never saw a church go up for sale. Since I've been an adult, I see churches for sale, abandoned and for sale all the time. That never happened my entire life growing up. Not until I was in my 40s did I start seeing churches themselves go under. There's one in Carrboro, there's one in Hillsboro. They died.
Or they're also like going with the times, which like not a lot of people are gathering in person. COVID did a big number, right?
Republicans are every week.
But I mean, Thomas, like that's not the be all end all as to what Democrats need. It's an interesting suggestion. I'll give you that.
Okay.
It's an interesting suggestion.
What I'm saying is Democrats need to start rebuilding and engaging in civic institutions. And there's a place they need to start. And church seems to me to be the one place they could start. And
I think they're already there. That's just.
But
anyway.
I think, I mean, look, anytime we're talking about generalities, it's, again, it's like the 35% discussion. What's the right number? I don't know. I don't frankly care. But you're talking about connecting with each other. And certainly we need to do more of that. And we need to do more of that in a way that helps the world. One of the reasons I think people go to church in lower numbers than they used to is some people see hypocrisy in the church. And I think that's reasonable. Especially when you say the church writ large. I mean, it's a bit like complaining about the media. Who are we talking about? I mean, these generalities are very difficult to deal in. But the idea, I think I'm seeing church membership overlap with protest movements on the left more than I knew they did. And maybe some of that is a function of the church I go to. But it's a lot of the same faces at a protest versus in the pews. I think some of what you're calling for, Thomas, might be happening. But again, I can't sit here and carry and speak to the broader implications of it. But human connection with people you do and don't agree with turned into action, that is how things change. You are right, sir.
Okay. So let's get off of my little whatever that was. But and let's move into some North Carolina politics. Again, one of my favorite subjects, the Burger Page race primary. Because what are we're like 6 weeks out from it, right?
It's so soon. Has early voting already started, or is just about to it starts in maybe early February?
Just about to.
I think
You
so.
can get a mail-in ballot right now, though.
Right, the mail-in
Yeah,
ballots
that's
have
what I
already
saw,
begun.
that the
Yeah.
mail-in ballots are available. Yeah.
So, yeah, and you know, an interesting poll just came out, and it has the sheriff of Rockingham County, Sam Page, leading Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger. I think it's 39-35. Still a lot of undecideds in that race, but I just got the poll this morning, so I hadn't had a chance to delve into it too deeply. But that's got to be really bad news for an incumbent to be trailing by any amount. And the bigger thing is if you've been an incumbent that long and you got that many undecideds, they're probably going to break against you. It particularly it feels like there's a lot of dissatisfaction out there. I did look a little bit at the crosstabs, and what I see is wary for Page is a lot of his is, I think, the poll said 25% of the voters would be unaffiliated voters. That seems a little bit high to me, and they're driving his numbers. He's winning the unaffiliated numbers by a pretty good number over Berger's. It's hard to know whether those are true, but if Berger loses this primary, it's an earth-shattering thing in Raleigh. And it right now it's feeling like this guy's got a good chance of losing. So
I think he does have a good chance of losing. It is clearly would be earth-shattering. I think there are probably a lot of people in and around the General Assembly who are taking a wait-and-see approach on a number of issues, possibly including the state budget, based on questions about whether or not Phil Berger is going to continue to be in the General Assembly. But so I looked up when early voting starts. Early voting in person starts February 12th. I will make a prediction that on or around February 12th, something big gonna drop about Sam Page. The Berger people have made it clear in public settings that they, have done the opposition research is part of every race, and these folks play for keeps, y'all. So I don't put much stock in polling generally, even when it consistently shows something, because it's so often you just look too far out. So this race could change radically. It could change not at all, but I will not bet against it changing significantly sometime in February. So, and I don't have any specific knowledge of what it would be. I just know, we all know how campaigns go, right? If you got something, you drop it at the most optimal time. And I think the way the early voting schedule has changed makes the early voting period the most optimal time.
Right. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Anderson, you got any thoughts on that primary?
No, I'm excited for Steve Lucan to beat whoever comes out of it. How about that?
Okay.
And I'm hoping that he's going to sway whoever's half voters that are not going to be successful in that primary, that vicious little primary that they've had out in Rockingham County, over to his side, who's been a 35-year family physician out there in Reidsville. So I'm excited, honestly. I think that might be the first time that a Democrat could actually have a chance at that seat under gerrymandered maps. Who knows?
Right. And, another primary, Carolina Forward came out with a poll that shows Whatley just way ahead of any of his opponents. I'm a little bit dubious of that. But, the more Whatley's on there, the more it seems to me he's got liabilities. They decided they had to make him, what do they call him? The FEMA czar or whatever, so he was supposed to be the guy who was going to deliver for Helene. And I keep saying, I don't ever see any good headlines that come out connecting FEMA to Helene. Just this week, didn't we see that something like almost nobody's gotten their houses from FEMA, that they're getting kicked out. They're losing their FEMA money. What's going on? Whatley's the FEMA czar, according to Trump. He's trying to distance himself from that. But if he's the FEMA czar, doesn't that ad kind of write itself?
Well, it's wild when you think about this weekend being the anniversary of when Michael Watley and Donald Trump together came out to Western North Carolina to Swannanoa and said that they were going to have this place rebuilt, right? And
Right.
here we are standing here an anniversary later, and it's still not, and nothing's changed really when you go out to Western North Carolina, especially for the communities out there. I was talking to Mayor Zeb Smathers yesterday out of Canton, and he was talking about how he's going up to DC this next week because he's so upset about the lack of federal relief that they've had help from and just what FEMA has continued to not do in Western North Carolina from this administration. And so I think we've seen a desperate need and even a bipartisan need, if you will, from people out there of saying that this has not been what they expected it to be. And even Republicans in the state legislature right now are sort of at the point where they're getting really antsy because they're coming up on their time frame for election and people are asking. And I think that it's only going to get worse when you look at areas like that.
I think a bipartisan delegation led by Josh Stein was just up there, right?
Yeah,
Is that
just up in DC. And,
Yep.
and that's where they did see, I think we do have $100 million that's coming out to the state, or that just got dropped, if I'm not mistaken, this week. But it's still not, it's not a drop in the barrel for what 35 counties throughout Western North
Right.
Carolina
I
needed
mean,
to
I think
see.
the estimate's $60 billion. So
Yes.
100 million doesn't really get you anywhere. Doesn't get you very far. Not that you don't want it, but
Especially
it's a
when you
long
look at
way.
like
What?
and the articles, right, that are coming out from the weather that we're going to see this weekend that some of you all may be experiencing now when this episode comes out, from another or winter weather impact in Western North Carolina. They were talking about how infrastructure out there is still like very fragile from trying or come back from Hurricane Helene, to the point that an ice storm could take out power lines, could take out operations out there for whole weeks, depending on what this may look like. And so, for any folks listening to this right now that are not keeping up, you can go to readync.gov and make sure that you are following along with weather updates from the governor's office directly and NCDOT. But it's an insane time right now to think about that we still don't have recovery from Hurricane Helene where it needs to be, and we're also seeing one of the most unprecedented winter storms this weekend that meteorologists are predicting.
Right. Yeah. Stay safe out there, and be ready to lose power. That's the other thing. It's ice storms are brutal. So
Yeah, I rarely get worried about the weather. I'm worried about this storm. And,
yeah.
when Thomas says, be ready, phones charged, backup heating source if you can, backup generator if you have it. Just, don't be
Fill up
messing
your car
around.
with gas.
Fill up
Right.
your car with gas, have food in the house, non-perishables.
Fill up
So
buckets or tubs with water so you can flush toilets.
that's right, toilet
'Cause
flushing water. And
Right.
I don't. This is not really the point of this blog, but the way you do that is you take the back off the top back of the toilet and you pour the water in there, and you can flush the toilet just fine. I don't know. I don't know if everyone knows that, but it just requires water pressure. It does not matter where that water pressure comes from. So
Travis's toilet lessons, everybody.
I'm telling you, Travis Fain PSA.
there you
It's,
go. There you go. Can I
You
build a
should put
toilet,
that on the
people? Yeah,
internet
build
before this
Kohler
week.
for that.
yeah.
Should say, just in case y'all didn't know, this is how you would do this.
We should do a tip for living every every episode. We'll have to workshop that offline. What
I
that
was like,
should
that's
look
gonna
like.
come from you and Thomas more so than me.
Right.
I'm still learning how to live over here.
Well,
Aren't we all?
I'm ready. I'm ready to fix any house that needs to be fixed. So, anyhow, so do we have anything else pressing? Travis, you got any thoughts?
I'll hit a couple. Although Anderson, if you're champing at the bit, you can go.
No, I just want to mention, because I think it's important on here, that North Carolina, the DNC had their window last Friday that closed for states to apply to be one of the first in the nation. And North Carolina was one of the 12 states that applied, one of the 5 that went up to be first in the nation. But also, if we get in that early window at all, we would be really excited about it. And so that does take a willingness from my state Republicans to also think about helping us out with that. And so if you are somebody who would agree with that and moving up North Carolina, and you believe that North Carolina deserves to have the opportunity to have a say in who's the next president of the United States, make sure that you're reaching out to your state legislator and telling them that you believe that that's what we should be doing, because it's going to help me lobby folks, I hope.
So, just out of curiosity, if that happened, would it move all the primaries to
There's 3 different
January? What's that?
There's 3 different options. So, like, the state legislature could decide to move everybody up. I don't think that they would because of how quick our turnaround window is from when you have to file to run for office. So, as folks may know, we file in December of the year previous to an election year for you to run for office for that year. So, 2026 election deadline to file to run for office was in December of 2025, and that's historically the way that it goes. And then we have a primary every March. So it's a very quick turnaround time for a primary. And if we were to move it up, we would potentially be in a February or January time frame for a primary like that. It isn't always like that. It depends on the calendar. And so some of that is a little calendar dependent on what the states sort of agree to, or like the DNC and the RNC, and sort of how the first and the days set sort of the dates when they want to have their presidential primary. So that would also, if it aligned with what the state wanted to do, they could. I would imagine what they would do is sort of a second option where you'd split up the primaries and you would allow a presidential primary on one day and then another primary for the rest of the ballot for state races on a different day. But there's also a third option where you just move everything up.
Right. Okay. Well, that would really. I mean, I think North Carolina, as far as Democrats go, we're pretty reflective of the nation as a whole. You know, we're diverse, and I think the idea that we have our first primaries and or caucuses or primaries in Iowa and New Hampshire, it's not very reflective of the broader Democratic Party, and I like the idea of having primaries in bigger states that are more diverse. I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
Tons of sense.
So hopefully, but also this is the first time North Carolina's ever done that. This first time we've ever applied. So at least we're putting our foot down as a hopefully to the nation that North Carolina's not here to play, and we're going to keep putting our money where our mouth is. Hopefully, in that sense, for the investments that we're going to see nationally too, because I think that both political parties stand to gain for or from having national investment in the state. When you're looking at North Carolina soon going to be a state that you can't not win it if you want to be president of the United States. And
That's
so
right.
hopefully we're going to make sure that people know that.
When's the decision?
Well, so Rules and Bylaws Committee for the DNC will meet at the end of this month, so January the 30th and 31st for their meeting, and they're going to decide which states are able to make it to the presentation round, and then hopefully we'll be part of that, because if not, then we sort of go out after that. But hopefully we'll make it to the presentation round. Then the Rules and Bylaws Committee will decide sometime around the summer or maybe later into the August timeframe, if I'm not mistaken. We got a little bit, but we made a good case, I think. And I really do. North Carolina has 22 statewide races on the ballot. It's the most out of any state in the entire country in 2028. And we also, to your point, Thomas, have one of the most densest geographical regions that also represents both urban and rural, and is a good sort of
Right.
test case for other states throughout the country for how to win as a Democrat in both rural places again. And I think that North Carolina could really be the if you could win here, you could win in Iowa, you could win in Nebraska, you could win in other states, and it's sort of like a test case, I think, for that for the party.
Travis, what you got?
I'll run through 4 quick little kind of newsy things. Saw a piece the other day. Amazon has said we'll expect price increases because inventories have turned over enough in people's warehouses to where the tariffs are really hitting harder now, are hitting on more things, and those costs are going to be passed on to online shoppers. And if you're listening to this and thinking, I thought other countries are going to pay the tariffs, you're a moron. I'm worried about the Affordable Care Act and healthcare policy in general. The president released some plan that I didn't hear too much about. So I guess it's not super viable. Kaiser Family Foundation has said that premiums are going to basically double on average. I am paying per month for my family's insurance because I'm an independent contractor. I have my own business. I pay $2,000 a month for health insurance, and that's kind of cost prohibitive for my family of 4. I don't know what we're going to do long term on that. Sure would be nice if the United States of America, the richest country on earth, could figure that shit out, as opposed to, I don't know, dragging people off the street because they're brown, or talking about invading Greenland. State-wise, we sure do need a state budget. I saw a good piece in the News and Observer where more than a third of North Carolina's correctional officer positions are unfilled. Some prison facilities have vacancies that exceed 50%. Some of these folks, prison guards, make like $9 an hour. I want you,
Right.
everyone at home, to imagine going to work for $9 an hour in a prison that has half or 70% of the staff it actually needs. Do you feel safe? Let's pass a state budget on that. One last thing, and I hope I didn't mention this last time because I'm not meaning to mention it twice, but Jeff Jackson, General Jeff Jackson, got some publicity around the turn of the year. There was one profile I saw in NC Newsline, but what I really want to recommend to people is go back and listen to Tim Boyham's interview with Attorney General Jeff Jackson in the Tying It Together with Tim Boyham podcast. Based on the questions that Tim asked and Attorney General Jackson's answered, it is a masterclass on how to think about communication strategy and how your role as an official and an elected leader, as that changes over time, how that changes your communication strategy. Jackson has consistently proven in the way he handles himself in public, the very, I would say, bipartisan way he's handling his job, even in an era when he has to fight the Trump administration on things. He has just really shown the steps and the notes that I think people can look at and do their best to follow the path that he's laying out there. I think it's a really smart strategy.
I think he's one of the best communicators in the country right now.
He's fantastic. He really is. But there are ain't none of us Jeff Jackson except Jeff Jackson, but there are
Right.
replicatable things and ways of thinking about your strategy he lays out in this interview on the Tying It Together podcast. Back in December it was.
8% of our state's workforce are gig workers or independent contractors, and that's what made me look it up because I was like, how many people across North Carolina are paying something like what Travis Fain is right now? So just to put that in perspective, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and so, to be fair, some of it has to do with the amount of revenue you bring in. You know,
Right.
I don't want I'm not crying poverty here, but I am concerned.
Well,
I bet a lot of those other folks would be though.
I'm paying a lot. I'm paying a lot too. I'm not paying what you're paying, but I'm paying a lot too, and it's hurting. And
Yep.
I think there are a lot of people. I mean, I watch my premium increase over 60%, and if people are feeling that, you know, it's going to be a political football. You know, the other point, that the budget point, and this is something, the budget does have impact. And I'm watching Republicans out there going, oh, it doesn't really matter because what we passed last year, you know, we're still in effect. It's not like we're having a shutdown like they do with the federal government. It has a real impact on the state when you don't pass a budget. And there's a reason that you're supposed to pass one. And what you're seeing in the prison system is exactly what it is. And you know, this is a matter of safety. This becomes a matter of public safety if we can't keep people who are dangerous, who shouldn't be in society, if we can't keep them locked up because we end up with a lack of personnel, or we end up with problematic. You know, when you start paying people $9 an hour and people are wondering how cell phones get in and how drugs get into prisons, I can tell you how. Those people are saying, you know, I can't make it on my salary, so I'm going to have to supplement it somehow. You know, this guy coming and offering me an extra couple $100 a month makes a difference. So, yeah, passing this budget is a real deal, and Republicans have dropped the ball on it completely.
I think they know, they believe, and I think rightly, that people don't vote on this.
Right.
But, I guess my pitch is, people may not vote on process, but you ought to vote on whether or not the people in power are doing their jobs, whether or not they're getting it done. And the legislature does a lot of things, but one of the most important things they're supposed to do is pass a budget.
Yeah. Well, what does move people is when something really bad happens, and all it's going to take is something really nasty to happen, some sort of prison incident where it ends up being guards getting killed or inmates getting killed on, you know, and that happens in prisons historically. You know, we have a long history of prison riots and dangerous things happening, and when it happens because you underfunded your state, that's where it becomes a political football.
Prisoners in North Carolina, it had fallen during and post-pandemic, I believe, under 30,000. And forgive me if I'm a little off on these numbers. People have Google, but it's creeping back up. They're big numbers.
Right. All right. Well, I'm not going to say anything else because I had my time when I talked about people should go to church again, and I got smacked down. But
I liked the part, Anderson, where you just yelled the names of public officials who attend church.
I was like, he's like,
Right.
Democrats don't go to church, and I'm like, no, they like, I know they do because I have seen and I see
But
them.
it's what gets back to my point is that
I was like, wait a
Democrats get
second.
blasted. They
Also, I'm like, the black church is like one of the foundational principles of like souls to the polls. Like, I was like, come on. But I get, Thomas, Democrats are base. And this is my thing. If you're a Democrat listening to this, please go to church. We got to get our numbers up for Thomas.
It won't hurt.
Okay. So, until next time, I appreciate you listening. We appreciate you listening. Hope that you stay safe. The weather's going to be rough. But until then, I'm Thomas Mills, signing off for Politics NC.